I'm then going to take this incredibly great honor to introduce and hold up our Friend of the League Award. This year, the Outstanding Friend of the League Award goes to Miss Christy Johnson. And I see Christy. Where's Christy? Christy, where are you? There you are.
I don't know. I am on your grid.
And Lisa?
There she is. So if everyone can see Christy, we want to thank her. She and her staff at Artemis Connection for developing the Horace Mann League strategic plan. Ms. Johnson is president and CEO of Artemis Connections, and their business plan includes donating talent to help nonprofit associations like the Horace Mann League. And we were privileged to be able to work with her over the last year with her expertise, helping to guide us as we go forward in carrying on this tradition. And Christy, would you just say a couple words this morning? And we are just so pleased to recognize and honor you.
Oh, absolutely. Well, first, thank you. It was quite the honor and quite the surprise. I'm a huge fan of public schools. They're critically important to the future of the United States. And wow, you've had quite the year. So we do believe in giving back. My team is really excited about anything we can do to support public schools. And we had the great fortune to connect with Jack and to work with the wonderful board to think about what could be done for the league in the future. We're quite honored to be able to participate. So to all of you, I just say thank you. Thank you for continuing to serve learners and for being in the trenches. And at some point it's going to get a little bit easier, right?
It'll be easier on our end because of the help that you've provided to the league. And our board member, Eric King, actually was going to step in and introduce you, but I'd like to give him a couple words to sing your praises. So Eric.
Well, Christy, I just had a few words to say, on behalf of the board of directors of the Horace Mann League. We would like to just congratulate you and thank you and your team for your personalized touch that you provided, as well as the professional service and the donation and delivery of what we believe is a very strong strategic plan that will take us well into the future. So again, on behalf of the board, congratulations to you and your team, and thank you for your support. Thank you so much.
Picture up here again.
Thank you, Eric. And Christy, again, thank you for being our Friend of the League this year. Your name will be added to a long list of other amazing supporters so that we can always hold you in that light. And we're just grateful. Your impacts will lead this association into the future. So thank you so much. Next, we are going to go to our board member, Lori Barron, who will introduce our next speaker. Lori.
Hi, greetings everyone from beautiful Kalispell, Montana, where the snow is on the ground and school is open. I am in my Friday spirit wear attire because we have everybody on campus today, so I apologize for my less than professional dress, but I'm certainly celebrating schools being open safely. I am honored to present today the 2021 recipient of the Horace Mann League Outstanding Public Educator Award to Dr. Joshua Starr. Dr. Starr has been the Chief Executive Officer of PDK International since July 2015. And under Dr. Starr, PDK has expanded educators rising across the nation, increased foundation support for its programs, and renewed support for PDK members and other educator scholars. He is the author of numerous essays, book chapters, and op-eds, and writes a monthly column on leadership for Kappan. Prior to joining PDK, Dr. Starr was superintendent of schools in Montgomery County Public Schools in Maryland for nearly 4 years, and previously superintendent of schools for Stamford, Connecticut for 6 years. Dr. Starr began his career teaching special education in Brooklyn, New York. He became a central office leader in school districts in the New York metropolitan area and served in the New York City Department of Education. Dr. Starr has a bachelor's degree in English and history from the University of Wisconsin, a master's degree in special education from Brooklyn College, and a doctorate in education from the Harvard University Graduate School of Education. Dr. Starr and his wife have 3 children who have all gone through public schools. We are honored to present Dr. Joshua Starr with the Horace Mann League Outstanding Public Educator Award for 2021.
Well, thank
and
you.
we would be honored to hear from you, Dr. Starr.
So I sent the wrong bio. I like to send the one that talks about all the mistakes I've made and all the things I wish I could have done differently, right, during my career. I feel like that's probably a more honest representation, but I really do appreciate it. It's really an honor to be with you all today and to receive this award. I've been a member of the league for a while and just really appreciate everything you do to protect public education. So this is really an honor and a privilege. So I asked my 7th grade son the other day at dinner whether they discussed the impeachment trial in class. And when he said no, they're not allowed to, I was taken aback. Now, my kids are in the same system where I was superintendent, and I know it to be a place where young people are very interested in politics. I first became aware of this when we joined a local pool. Having just moved from Brooklyn, we didn't know from pool clubs, but it seems to be a thing in Maryland. And actually, my 13-year-old is now a pretty serious swimmer. So as we were walking into the parking lot, I saw that someone, likely a teen, had used shaving cream to graffiti someone else's car by saying, "The driver of this car voted for Romney." And where I come from, the graffiti would have been about someone's mama, but in Bethesda, political jokes seem to hit harder. So the culture of the community being just outside DC is one of hyper-awareness to all things political. Yet classrooms don't seem to be the place where young people are learning how to engage in political discourse. When I probed a little, my 7th grader said, "Well, we can talk about it, but teachers just aren't allowed to express their opinions." My 12th grader, who is super interested in politics and likes to flip between MSNBC and Fox to see what different sides are saying about the issues, chimed in and said, "Well, we can talk about politics. We're just not allowed to take sides. We have to stick to the issues." I then grew increasingly agitated and replied something to the effect of, "Well, what the heck?" I probably used worse language. If you're not allowed to express your
Sorry, I hit the wrong button. I just want to say goodbye. Sorry about that.
Are we teaching kids these days that debate isn't okay? Shouldn't we be teaching how to engage in discourse rather than avoid it? When I quoted David Hume for the umpteenth time and said, "Truth springs from arguments among friends," is when they rolled their eyes and went back to their dinners. I'm used to this happening at my table, and I sometimes feel sorry for my kids as they can't escape a father who's an educator and thinks he knows everything about what should be happening in schools. So right after the January 6th insurrection, we surveyed our Educators Rising students and teachers to try to get a sense of whether and how the terrible events of that day should be discussed in the classroom. Most everyone wanted them to be discussed, but there was a stark divide between students' views of their teachers' ability to not infuse their political ideology into the conversation and that of teachers. Many students don't have much faith that teachers will be neutral. Many teachers are confident of their ability to discuss political issues without the lens of their own ideology. And here's where I struggle. Not with the question of whether or not an educator can keep their own views out of the conversation, but whether they should. I imagine that many of us struggle with this question these days as the ills of our society continue to be foisted upon our public schools. The gross inequities in America manifest in our schools, and they have been writ large by the coronavirus pandemic. And the architecture of our public education system has been exposed as woefully inadequate to meet the demands of our time. Not only do we not agree on whether to reopen schools, local control renders unanimity impossible. Moreover, schools simply aren't designed to attend to the deep needs of our students, families, and communities, although they've been increasingly asked to do so. While I have been awestruck by the actions of leaders throughout the country to get students fed and meet their basic needs, it is yet another example of how schools are left to do it all. Let's say we could adequately feed every child and attend to their physical and emotional well-being so that they can re-engage in learning. Wonderful. But too many still wouldn't have Wi-Fi or a device because of the failures of elected officials and corporations. Schools are not designed to do what they're now being asked to, despite the heroism of so many of our educators. Schools, in fact, are designed as the ranking and sorting mechanism for American society. While every child may have access to a public school building, at least pre-pandemic, which certainly wasn't the case in Horace Mann's time, too many don't have access to the kind of instruction that will enable them to thrive in an increasingly complex world on their own terms. The same standardized tests that many cling to as evidence of inequities have, in fact, been used to calcify the stratification of our society. And herein lies a paradox. The NCLB era exposed what many of us suspected and too many parents already knew. Public schools have not served Black, Latinx, ELL, special ed, and poor kids well. Standardized testing has, in fact, driven and inspired efforts to address inequities. It has also laid bare the inadequacy of our public institutions in being able to actually do so. But the utility of standardized tests as anchors of both our accountability and school improvement efforts no longer holds. Perhaps more importantly, their significant effect on what kids are actually taught will be felt for too long, which is evidenced in the milquetoast approach to engaging students in learning about politics. The relentless focus on ELA and math as measured by standardized tests has narrowed curriculum in classrooms across the country. Yes, there are wonderful examples of schools that have managed to maintain a rich and balanced instructional program and also show success on tests, but these are outliers. Most schools are average, a mathematical fact, of course, and as such, have focused their efforts on the brass ring of proficiency on ELA and math. So the reasons why my son's teacher may not discuss the events of January 6th or the impeachment is directly related to both the difficulty of doing so and the lack of incentive for schools to invest in creating the kind of instructional environment that promotes a healthy dialogue about divisions within our society. To effectively engage students in understanding history and current events from multiple perspectives requires that teachers are trained to do so. They need to know how to pull together appropriate materials, which certainly aren't found in a textbook. They must know how to pose questions that lead to engaging conversation. They need to facilitate debate without imposing their own perspectives. They need to assess student performance in multiple ways, as some students may not want to verbalize their opinions. They need to attend to the social emotional needs of students who may not know how to engage in healthy discourse because they rarely see it modeled. They must communicate with families if need be to help them understand the intent of their lessons, and the list goes on. Not only has there been scant investment in such professional learning, there are political disincentives to doing so. Public education is a distinctly political entity, and while every superintendent I've known decries the politics of their position, there is no escaping that multiple interests must be arbitrated within schools and districts. Teaching young people about the stark and disheartening realities of our time is no easy feat. The preponderance of social media and opinion masquerading as news has cemented people's positions and obfuscated our shared interests. Educators trying to bridge divides must navigate these treacherous political waters at their own risk, with few lifeboats nearby to save them if they capsize. So the dinner time conversation with my sons caused me consternation, as I am of the belief that educators need to lean into these conversations. After all, if not us, then who? If not now, when? If we can't figure it out, I'm not sure who can. And we have the moral and civic responsibility to do so. We are public educators, after all, and our obligation is to our public and our republic. The burden we bear is to think about our collective common good and how we can heal the world. My distress at what my sons and everyone else's sons and daughters may not be getting in today's classroom is counteracted by what I see happening with some young people today. I am witnessing a new generation of educators not just lean into these difficult conversations, but jump in with both feet and demand that we have them. A few years ago, we presented our annual PDK poll results at Towson University in Maryland. Towson has the largest educator prep program in the state and is one of our Great Educators Rising partners. We held the poll event there because we wanted to engage with the upcoming generation of educators rather than the usual suspects inside the Beltway. No offense to my pundit and policy friends. After the presentation, we held a smaller meeting with just the students and our speaker, Rodney Robinson, who is the National Teacher of the Year. We wanted the students to have an opportunity to talk to Rodney about what it means to be a teacher, and we wanted Rodney to inspire these future educators. The conversation was deliberately open-ended, and I was struck by how quickly the participants started talking about social justice, equity, and how to be an anti-racist ally. Most of the students were young white women, like most educators in America. Rodney is not a young white woman. He's a Black man who's worked with some of the most vulnerable students in our communities, young men in juvenile detention. Having worked with this population myself, I know full well how most educator prep programs spend no time discussing how to serve such kids. But the Towson students saw an opportunity to jump in feet first to a difficult conversation. They weren't afraid to talk about things that I can imagine might tear a faculty meeting apart. They weren't afraid to own their own privilege and entitlement. They showed their vulnerability in order to increase their learning so that they could fulfill their obligation to our common good. They knew they had to learn to engage in difficult conversations in order to serve their future students. And they knew they had to work on themselves first. An evaluation of our Educators Rising program affirmed what I see when I attend our annual conference and talk to students. Many of our students have always wanted to be teachers. Oftentimes, this is because of a personal experience with a great teacher who taught them English when they first came to this country, or spent extra time helping them master difficult content, or was a shoulder to lean on when they were having a tough time at home. Some have siblings with special needs and learned early on the power of great teachers. But many of our kids are more like me. I never intended to be a teacher. I always knew I would do something in public service and always wanted to heal the world. But it wasn't until after college that I realized if you want to serve the public and improve our republic, if you want to go from common good to common great, you become an educator. A lot of our Educators Rising students are activists who see public education as the path to serve their communities. Frankly, some of them may not even become teachers or may not stay in the classroom their whole careers. Some of them may not see how they can exercise their passion, their creativity, and their sense of purpose in our schools. Some of them may not be ready to join an institution that all too often does a better job of maintaining the status quo than sparking innovation and disrupting stark inequities. And while some of them may not be ready or willing to join us, I fear that we may not be ready for those that do. I asked my high school senior the other day what he thought about all the agita and anxiety coming from parents about school reopening, the loss of spring sports, and all the attention being paid to the mental health of our young people these days. He said something to the effect of, "Yeah, Dad, those are all real issues, but what you don't realize is that most kids just don't really care what you all have to say." He was essentially telling me that all of our hand-wringing and efforts to make sure our kids are all right may be for naught. Now, my son knows his parents love him and we're there for him. He's a good kid in a stable home, and we don't have to worry about him too much. He's not arguing for a laissez-faire approach to parenting, as he appreciates all that we've done for him. And I want to be clear, the issues our children are experiencing are real, and we need to be hyper-attuned to their emotional well-being. His comments, however, made me think about how much of our efforts are focused on talking to and at young people and not with them. Now, this happens in schools all the time in the way we treat students. I fear that it extends to how we treat teachers, especially young teachers of color. I don't know if we're ready to hear what they want to tell us about what they expect, how they want to be treated, and what they hope our schools will do for our children. But I also know that so many educators have embraced the moral imperative of equity and anti-racism as a new common good. I've seen an explosion of districts creating DEI positions and philanthropy invest in new organizations led by leaders of color. While some retrograde state legislators might be acting out against the 1619 project, more and more districts and schools are diversifying their materials and revising their curricula to be more culturally proficient. More of us are jumping in feet first, recognizing that we owe it to our young people, our communities, our public, and our republic to tackle difficult issues. And as I see this happening throughout the country, I'm reminded of the great book, We Make the Road by Walking. In it, Miles Horton and Paulo Freire have a conversation about education. I loved reading this book when I was starting out on my journey because it captures the essence of what I believe public education to be about. Horton, who trained generations of activists at the Highland Center, and Freire, the godfather of education as liberation, see education as a political act. Simply through the act of educating people, we are healing our world. The title of the book, inspired by a poem by Antonio Machado, embraces the idea that we just have to start walking even when there isn't a clear path before us. The young people who seek to educate are making that path, and I am perfectly willing to walk beside or behind them. The young people who demand racial justice in our schools and our society are making that path, and it is our responsibility to listen to and learn from them. Taking on these incredibly difficult social issues within our schools is challenging, risky, and maybe even a little scary. And it raises more questions than answers. But as the great James Baldwin said about the purpose of education in his talk to teachers, the purpose of education is to ask questions of the universe and learn to live with those questions. That is the way he achieves his own identity. I want to thank the Horace Mann League for this wonderful honor. It truly is a privilege. I thank you for giving me a couple minutes to talk with you all today, and I look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's give Josh Starr an amazing round of applause. I mean, is there any wonder that he's our outstanding public educator honoree today. He has inspired all of us. I saw tears actually. So thank you so much. All of us that have kids and work with students, I think really understand what you're saying. So thank you so much for your incredible insights today. We are really honored to have you as our outstanding public educator. And we are going to move next to our outstanding friend of public education award, and that will be introduced by Ruben Alejandro, our board member. Thank you again, Mr. Starr.
Good afternoon, good morning, and good noon to everyone, whatever part of the country you're at. I have the distinct pleasure, nay, the honor of introducing the recipient of the Outstanding Friend of Public Education Award, Colonel Consuelo Castillo Kickbush, affectionately known in the educational circles as Chelo. Chelo comes from the Laredo, Texas, an area known as El Rincón del Diablo, which literally translates to the Devil's Corner. The reason that it was referred to that way is because it was a very rough area, and children in that area had little to no hope of succeeding and moving ahead in life. Consuelo beat the odds because she had a strong family support system, and she achieved a very illustrious military career, but she was still upward bound. But because of a promise she had made to her mother, she decided to retire from her illustrious military career, and she went out and started trying to help children to succeed. That was a promise she had made to her mother. She wanted to make sure that children had an opportunity to succeed, especially children like coming from this area. She has done that so very well in the time that she has been in education, that she has helped children nationally and internationally. That's why Consuelo, Colonel Kickbush, is very worthy of this award that she is about to receive. So help me welcome Colonel Kickbush, Chelo.
Gracias, Manito. Thank you, my brother. And I'm a storyteller, so I tried to discipline myself this morning by writing some of these comments. But first to Dr. Starr, what a beautiful, profound look at humanity. Because if we cannot have those dialogues in our children's mind to create consciousness, then what are we raising? And that's the bigger question of how democracy gets sustained. So to you, Dr. McKay, to the members of the Horace Mann community, thank you. I have some colleagues of mine that have logged in, friends from years and years of support and faith in the work that we created 25 years ago to help a part of the school community that at the time seemed to be left out of the conversation. And I'm talking about parents, particularly immigrant parents, first generation parents. And I knew that coming into a new career, that I was the new kid on the block. And that, like Dr. Starr, I'm a provoker. So I was wondering, why do we just engage parents or entertain parents? But the bigger question is, why don't we seek to develop and embrace the leadership of our families so that when we educate the parent, the entire family gets educated? So I have these words for you. And just like Dr. Starr said, I have conversations with my children. I have 5 daughters. One of my daughters is with me today, and she asked me as we were cleaning dishes. She said, "Mom, how do you feel?" I said to her, as I'm about to say to you, I am a storyteller. So my story goes like this. Somewhere, a young brown-skinned girl, growing up hearing gunfire or knifings, or the old West Side Story gangs that became a Broadway was my reality. Of the local bar where many an adult went to heal the wounds of not being able to support their families, where so many forms of abuse became family secrets, and where a brown-skinned girl dared to think that tomorrow would get better. Where would this help come from? And so she went to sleep with a prayer. And there in that sleep, I would say a fairy tale happened. It was there that, let me decline this. It was there then that this fairy said, little brown-skinned girl, there will come a time for your ancestors have sacrificed much, but it has become your legacy for you to one day rise. And yes, you will rise up, and you will speak for the voiceless, and you will stand in a place that was made sacred. For in that place, many were not given the right to stand. You will become educated because, as your father said, public education is the most concrete form of democracy. Oh, little girl, brown-skinned girl, they will first look at your skin, and some may choose not to teach you, for they believe, how can you go far? You don't speak English. You sound funny when you do. You smell, perhaps of a smell of a food that others do not want to smell, like cilantro and ajo and hierbabuena. But little brown-skinned girl, don't let those things get in your way. For there will come a teacher, one that will provoke you, to question you, and to ask you, so what is your destiny? Brown-skinned girl, remember that along the way in your life, there will be ups and downs. But this is not just a dream. It has a name. It is called the American dream. And you have earned it by the rights of your birth, but you shall fight for it in lands far away or in your own backyard. To my fellow veterans, we know how much we stand up for democracy in somebody else's backyard. But the greatest challenge that we wear outside our uniform is to stand up for democracy at home. Because in other people's lands, they do not see our color or our gender. All they see is US, and that means us. So I ask of us today, that's my father, that Mexican immigrant who wanted to speak English, gave us the greatest duty of all. And his words still pierce me today. Este no es mi país, pero sí es el suyo. This could not be my country, but it is yours. Si no le pueden dar, no me le quite. If you cannot give to it, don't you dare take from it. Y si la única bandera que estas manos aceptarán es por la vida que le dieron a su país. And so I expect of you, all of my children, that if the only flag I will ever accept in these callous hands of a laborer is because you dare to give your life to your country, then I accept that flag only. And of my 10 brothers and sisters, 8 of us are veterans. So I'm asking us today, where do you go to find the true sense of democracy if it's not in of America's public schools and in their classrooms? And that the discourse is for us to seek to understand, not to seek to win or lose, but to learn the discernment of the words that matter to our consciousness. And so it is that as I was in that dream, that last words of that fairy tale were that one day you would acknowledge this dream into reality. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm 66 years old this year, 1,000 school districts, 49 states, Alaska still pending, 1 million children. The dream lives. It is real, but it's not without a sacrifice. So to my children, who've hundreds of hours as the mother who's an activist has spent away from you, to my husband, David Kickbush, who has spent the last 30 years of his life raising our children, while I drive through the night onto Native Nations or Stamford, Connecticut, or the barrios of Bridgeport, Washington, that I knew they were privileged, and that the unprivileged mother, who was now privileged, could not stay in privilege without always remembering that we are not here to lead for ego or for power, but simply for something greater than ourselves, which is to serve others. So to Horace Mann, I believe that public education is an investment. It should never be looked upon as a cost. For the denial of any child in the greatest nation of the earth to be educated is the greatest form of a criminal act. Mr. Mann knew in his heart, and most of all, in his consciousness. And yes, he was brave and courageous to question the status quo, long before the words of equity or inclusion became modern words for us to ponder upon. So let us continue to rise up in our own way. We, the privileged, we, the blessed ones, we, the ones from wherever road we have come, whether it's el Rincón del Diablo, or as my teacher who changed my life forever, Mr. Cooper, that white dude, as we would call him, from South Boston, who came to my barrio with books under his arm, spoke his broken Spanish, met my parents, and said to me the words I had never heard. Consuelo, you are brilliant. Don't fight. Use your brain to make an argument as to the why. Why the division? Why the injustice? And provoke consciousness. So thank you, Mr. Cooper, for teaching that brown-skinned girl that that dream she had would become her reality. God bless you. God bless this great nation with all its flaws. It is still the greatest place for us to raise our own children, and those who visit, may they go back wherever they go and always speak of a nation, America, that was a good place to go and to live. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those powerful, powerful comments. We're just so blessed to have you with us today. And yes, Marty just said, bravo, Consuelo, inspirational. Absolutely. And we are going to move to an opportunity to have a panel discussion with both of our honorees that will be facilitated by Jim Harvey, and I will at this time turn it over to him. And if you have questions, please put them in the chat box. And I know that Jim also has some determined ones. So we'll turn it over to him. And thank you again, both for your inspiring words and your ongoing commitment to public education.
Thank you very much, Lisa. I am just blown away by those two presentations. And we have over the years had some wonderful presentations from distinguished guests, but the power of these two is particularly special. And I want to say, Consuelo, I was particularly struck by your father's comment that if you aren't willing to give to this country, don't you dare take away from it, take anything from it. I think that's quite right. All of us have I bet you everyone on this call has a Mr. Cooper in their background. I know that I do. His name was Mr. McMahon, and he inspired me as a young boy living in an Irish slum in London to take myself seriously and to get moving. I think I've just tossed out my dull predetermined questions because the presentations were so powerful. I think the one thing that came through to me was the importance of storytelling. Josh has his story about, his interactions with his children around January the 6th and his anxieties about how we teach democracy in our schools today. And you, of course, have your own wonderful story. And I think we're addicted to data in this country at this point, particularly around education. And as none of us like to quote Stalin, but he said one death is a tragedy, a million deaths is just a statistic. And the data has depersonalized what should be a very personal issue around schools. So, Josh, let me ask you this. You said during your comments that the architecture of public schools exposed the inequities in our system and that schools aren't designed for the pandemic world that we're living in now. We're playing a game now with sort of the old rules of the schools, and the issue becomes, I think, what should the schools look like in this post-pandemic world? You laid out some of the things that it should move towards, but the question is, we don't really want to go back to normal because, as someone has said, normal is where the problems were. So this question to you, Josh, is what do you see the schools looking like as we move towards the future?
Well, first, Consuelo, thank you for that just wonderful speech and story, and I just find it so powerful, and thank you for that. And I want to also, on the data piece, so I'm a former accountability guy, and as my friend Brian Olkowski there knows, having worked with me a long time ago, I have two mantras about data. One is use them to name names, and at best, they help you ask better questions. And if we use data correctly, they're an entry point into stories to understand who our children are and who their families are. And it actually goes to this larger question of how we can reorganize our systems that are controlled by taxpayer dollars and government-funded agencies to actually understand who the kids are and the families are that are most in need. That's what's been writ large these days, right? We know, and the only silver lining in the pandemic, if there is one, is that everybody's realized that technology is actually can be useful, and everyone's been forced to use it. And holy crap, we have so many kids that are really in dire straits, which we all knew, but now many more people do. So how do you leverage that as an opportunity? And I'm not going to take your bait, Jim, and tell you how 3.7 million teachers in 14,000 plus districts what they should do come September 1. But I do think there's a process issue here that we should be really attentive to, right? Because I don't want to tell schools how to do it necessarily. I want to have non-negotiable stakes in the ground around what excellence looks like and what equity means and what social justice means. I want to insist that our schools are places where kids feel loved, valued, respected, and are held to very, very high standards, just like Consuelo, right? You got to have high standards for our kids. But every school community, and that's the nature of the design in our system, right? Every school community figures that out within its local context. I think part of the challenge of the last 20, 25 years has been this sort of this effort to somehow scale and replicate things that only work in particular contexts, and say, well, if they do it well over there, let's do it well here. And I think what we have to invest in is a process, and I'll just kind of stop on this, that really rests on collective leadership, and retrains leaders and holds them accountable, frankly, and supports them in tapping into the energy and intelligence of their families, of their teachers, of their students, of their community. And we can organize around and insist on that as we then redesign what school looks like going forward. That's what I think the most important thing to do is really focus on the process of how we figure out what the new normal is, or what it is, rather than saying, oh, it should be X, Y, or Z. That's where I think we should put our energies.
Thank you. Consuela, you spoke of gunfire and knifings that a young brown girl experienced as a child. The Educational Testing Service a couple of years ago came out with a report that described the lives of middle class and children living in middle class and wealthy families as advantage piled on advantage. Stable homes, private schools, travel abroad, and the lives of low-income children as disadvantage piled on disadvantage. Unstable homes frequently, violence in the community, under-resourced schools. So how have you given any thought at all to how the lives of the children in these lower income communities can be improved through policy or through well, you spoke of families and parents being involved more in the discussion. Can you speak more about that?
Thank you for the question. But I would like to add one more other dimension about visiting children of wealth. Mm-hmm. There's a misunderstanding, in mm-hmm. my humble opinion, which is what I think Josh is trying to get us to have this dialogue. Children of wealth and privilege also suffer a deficit that children of disadvantage have as an advantage. And that is called the street smarts. So the street smarts, it's what builds resilience. And children of privilege and advantage don't have that resilience. And so it gets portrayed as if you're rich and you're affluent, you're going to automatically be successful. But your EQ is very low. Your privilege and your sense of entitlement creates a vacuum in how you relate to the rest of the world. And I've seen this by working with many affluent children who, once we create a safe space, tell me how miserable they are because their parents are always gone. They're always looking for the next $1 million, and they're not being nurtured as a single mom, perhaps in the ghetto, who do because of her hard, long working hours, but she still has something called a foundation, and that maybe she sleeps in the same room. She has this proximity. And so there is this bonding that takes place that researchers don't seem to quantify. And so we lump this idea of affluency and low income as being very separate, but they each have their own demons to deal with. Having said that, it still creates another need, and which is where I felt in my own consciousness, is to create a curriculum for families to then have a safe place to talk about what are those fears. There's a naivete among coming from a disadvantaged income of not knowing what you don't know, but also not to use the blame game that everything they do is not towards success in their children. I celebrate my poverty. I celebrate and see that it prepared me for this greater thing called life. So I always empower the parents, whether they're living in a garage or homeless, that they have many skills that affluent families will never be able to acquire until they experience deprivation. So I always begin with the idea that every family has something and a gift, and they can begin from there to stretch themselves to learn. I had a superintendent say to me the other day that when our families graduate from our institute, and right before the pandemic, he could distinguish clearly between a mother who had been through our social emotional learning leadership development model and a mother that was coming to complain and accuse the district of not doing their job. The idea then is to bring these families forward, but not to entertain them, not to give another bake sale. It is to bring them to the table, to add to the wisdom of what a school district needs to move forward. And I've been to those school districts. Farmington, New Mexico is a classic example of where a visionary like Gene Schmidt has brought the Navajo children. And he did it in Bridgeport, Washington, when we worked for 12 years with the migrant families. And people say what Josh was saying, what about the data? You know, how good is this idea of having the families become equal partners? Well, they won the #1 award in Washington State for academic success. 98% economically disadvantaged, 99% ELL, and 100% college ready. There's your data. But if you leave families out of the conversation, and that includes affluent families, then we will raise children to see themselves different. And that difference is going to collide in their adult lives.
I'm not sure how much time we have left for questions.
We have let's do one more question. We have a couple in the chat box, but one is, please share the books you've recently read that should be on our top shelves. Might be a good one to end on.
Okay, Josh.
I just put in Sing Like a State by James Scott, which is like one of my favorites. I know many of you have read it. It very much changed my thinking about how not only agriculture, and I think Jim was quoting Stalin before, and Stalin as well, but yeah, just how the whole idea is how bureaucratic efforts to improve society have failed over and over and over. So that's been my most favorite recent nonfiction, along with Lydia Rainey and Meredith Honig's book on principal supervision, which is a great one. Right. Fiction, I'm reading Hamnet, and there was another book I just read that was great.
Well, I would recommend Consuelo's book, Journey to the Future.
Thank you.
Yeah.
One of the other books that I just, it's the Boxcar Benny. My brother, James, with my other brothers, lived in a boxcar. Brent knows that story. In 1948 to 1954, it is believed over 30,000 American families, Czechoslovakian, Irish perhaps, and Mexican and Puerto Rican lived in boxcars. And many lived there for up to 15 years in places like Sterling, Illinois. The history books have not truly added that to American history. My brother's 82 years old, and I was able to nudge him a little bit to write about that American history timepiece, what it was like growing up in the boxcars. So not because he's my brother and I love him dearly. I think he's done social justice to the thousands of immigrant families whose story has not been told about the boxcar settlement.
Thank you both very much. Despite the challenges our society is facing, I think leaders have to be optimistic about the future. I mean, despite how difficult things are right now. And the two of you have given us a wonderful sense of the possibilities of the future. And we are deeply, deeply grateful to both of you. So thank you very much.
Thank
I
you.
love you. Thank you.
And I'll turn it back to you, Lisa.
Thank you so much for those inspiring words. And we've had requests to share your remarks out with our members. And I hope you're both comfortable with that. They, I think, will inspire even so many more. So thank you very much for being with us today. And I want to turn it to one of our other inspiring board members who's done a lot of incredible work in public education, David Berliner, and he is going to talk with us about our 100-year celebration book. So, David.
Thank you. Good to be with you all. Just to let you know, Josh Starr, Marty Brooks, Jim Harvey, and Bill Mathis, who are on with us today, are all writers for the book, as am I. And it's on schedule. If you've done one of these books, you know the routine. It takes a long time to get it out. We are on schedule. I just checked before this meeting for a November 2021 release with a 2022 copyright, because we wanted the 2022 copyright as our 100th anniversary. So we are on schedule. Some of the writings are terrific. I made a decision earlier, and I should say with my co-editor, Carl Hermans, we made a decision early on that we wanted essays, not research pieces. My life is in research, meaning when I write a good piece, 8 people read it. And so I decided that we should have essays that are more approachable. And I think we pulled this off, and it also led me to believe that essay writing is a great way to say something. And I've just been writing my own essays now for the last few months and trying to get them published, because I don't need to go to a library. I don't need to run a study. I need to take my experiences and make sense of them. And so Consuelo, the storytelling tradition, I recommend to everybody that they become essayists, which is the storytelling tradition, in modern form, I guess. So we're on schedule. That's the main thing. We have pictures, a few pictures in there, some of which are terrific, we think. They break up sections. The sections are not as coherent as normal sections, but they address a theme, including 4 or 5 pieces on what we ought to be as public schools. But they honor us. The public schools, as everyone here knows, this is a part of our if we're going to have a great future, the public schools are going to be the place where it's made. And that's a theme running through the book. We have some wonderful pieces. And Bill Mathis even has the lead-off chapter. And so we honor him with the lead-off chapter, very creative piece. And there's nothing else to say. We're on schedule. And I might add, for those of us on the board, I would expect a few $1,000s a year for the first 2 or 3 years coming into our budget. Carl and I are not getting anything. The authors are not getting anything. It all goes to our budget, and that might help us. So if I took a guess, I'd say $5,000 a year for 3 years is reasonable if we can push it, and we can push it among our membership as well. So that's my report.
Thank you so much for leading this incredibly important effort. And we are all excited for the final product. Yes, let's give Dr. Merliner a big hand, and we're just grateful. And it's wonderful to see you.
Thank you.
Lisa and David, how do we get the book?
That's a good question. I haven't given it any thought. I was so concerned with getting it to the publisher on time. So that was my first goal. Your raised the issue. I assume every author will be getting copy very soon to work on. And I will ask how we get a book. I think every author gets one copy. I'm almost sure of that.
The short answer should be you pay for it. Teachers College will promote the book on their website, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, yeah. But that's a good answer. But you will get your own copy, I'm sure. So
we'll be sure to have copies at our annual meeting next year as well, I'm sure, to for sale,
yeah,
not for giveaway.
Yeah, I might say, you know, we ought to think. Josh is a writer in it too. A number of these essays would be good to for you with other groups that you're members of to get out to them. I mean, none of us want to copyright it. None of us are going to make money on it. We wrote because we have a belief in something, and I would argue that we should make this very much open access. And if Josh and his magazine and journal wants to republish it, we'd say great. And if you have local magazines and publications, you want to republish something, I think that's great. I don't know what Teachers College would say, but I don't think we should tell them. We should just go ahead and republish stuff that we like, that has some impact.
You are classic, and I think we'll continue to have this conversation going forward. And so let's give one more hand of applause, and just how grateful and thankful we are for your leadership in this important effort. And to be continued in terms of how we get this incredible work out across the country. Thank you again. And I think at this point, we are at the close of our hour. We have one other housekeeping duty, which is to elect our officers for 2021. And so I will want to entertain a motion to accept the officers, as I'll read here, and they're on the screen. You can see, you can read them for yourself. Our incoming president, Jim Harvey, executive director of the National Superintendent's Roundtable, our president-elect, Ruben Alejandro, the educational consultant and former superintendent, our vice president, Brent Clark, who's the executive director of the Illinois Association of School Administrators, and I will become the past president for the coming year. And you can see those reappointed to the board: Linda Darling-Hammond, Marty Brooks, Talisa Dixon, and new to the board, Beth Huff and Jeannie Collins. So I entertain a motion to approve this slate.
This is Laurie. I make the motion we approve the slate as written.
And is there a second?
Martha will second that.
It's been moved by Laurie and seconded by Martha. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 I'm going to assume that that's a unanimous support for our slate. And with that, I want to thank our sponsors of this event. The Student Impact Consulting by Ruben Alejandro, the Achievement Initiative with Matt Kreis, Artemis Connections with our friend of the league, Christy Johnson, and our School Leadership LLC by Charles Fowler. And we are at Scranton, also via Christy Johnson. We are forever grateful for our corporate sponsorship and for your support to this important event. So thank you, and let's give our sponsors a big hand and appreciate them. And with that, we'll come to a close. What a fantastic opportunity we've had together today to celebrate public education and all of the promise on the horizon of the future for our students and public education in America. So thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your day. And with that, we'll close the meeting. I'm handing the gavel right now. This is the gavel. We're handing it over to James Harvey. So Jim is our new chair, and welcome to the post.
Welcome, Jim.
I am accepting the gavel, and I want to say to everyone who has watched Lisa perform here today and how deftly she has moved us along to get this agenda completed in 60 minutes knows I have very big shoes to fill. So let's give Lisa a big hand for her year and her dedication to the Horace Mann League. You've done a terrific job, Lisa. Thank you so much. And with that, unless there's something else for the good of the order, I think we stand adjourned.